In the Middle Ages, Dunwich in Suffolk was one of the largest towns in England. Churches, a harbor, thousands of people. And almost all of it now lies offshore, under grey water. Here is the record. Dunwich had 8 or 9 churches, a mint, a fleet, a proper harbor. Then the sea came for it. 2 great storm surges did most of the damage. The storm surges of 1286 and 1328 tore into the town, choked the harbor with shingle, and dragged street after street over the cliff. The town did not fall all at once. It went piece by piece, church by church, over the next 600 years. By the 1750s, one building was left teetering on the crumbling cliff edge. All Saints' Church. For a while it stood there alone, its tower leaning out over the beach, the graveyard already half gone. And then it went too. The last stones of All Saints fell into the sea in 1922. You can find the dates in the parish records. That is not folklore. That is written down. That is the record. This is what people say. They say that on a still night, out over the water where the town used to be, you can hear the church bells, ringing, faint under the waves. Fishermen said it. Visitors have said it for generations. Now, I am not telling you the bells ring. I am telling you that is the story people carry, and that the town they are ringing for was absolutely real. So, number 1, Dunwich in full, the drowned medieval capital of the East. Most of it is out there now, offshore, lying under grey water with the sand slowly moving over it. On the land above, only a handful of houses are left, a pub, a few cottages, a lane, a place that was once a city, reduced to a village you could walk through in 10 minutes. Hold on to Dunwich, because we are coming back to it. It is the last place on this list, and it is the most substantial drowned place of all. But we have 8 more stretches of coast to reach first, and each one lost something real. Number 2, Ravensor Odd, on the Humber, in the old East Riding of Yorkshire. Now, this was a serious port. Built on a spit of sand and shingle where the river meets the sea, it was granted a market in the 13th century. It had its own customs, its own members of parliament, and it did enough trade to rival Grimsby just up the coast. Then came the Great Storm, the Dutch called the Grote Mandrenke, the drowning of men. The Grote Mandrenke storm of 1362 swallowed Ravensor Odd whole. And here is the strange part. Nothing of it stands, not a stone. Historians still argue about where exactly it sat, out in the estuary mudflats. We know it existed. We are not entirely sure where. Sit with that for a moment. A whole town, gone so completely that its own position is a matter of debate. Number 3, Hall Sands in Devon. This one is closer, and in some ways worse, because we know exactly why it happened. In the 1890s, dredgers hauled up shingle from the bay just offshore, millions of tons of it, to build the naval dockyard at Plymouth. That shingle was the beach's armor. Take it away, and the sea reaches the houses, which is exactly what happened. The dredging of shingle for Plymouth's dockyard left the village exposed, and then, on the night of the 26th of January 1917, the storm of January 1917 came in on a high tide and finished it. In a single night, almost every house in Hallsands was destroyed. The ruins are still down there, stone walls and empty doorways, clinging to the shore below the cliff. Almost every house, in a single night. Hold that number. Holderness is going to beat it. Holderness in Yorkshire is the fastest eroding coastline in Europe, losing land by the meter every year. But before we get there are 2 parishes in Norfolk where the sea left just one thing standing on the open beach, a single church tower. Number 4, Eccles-on-Sea in Norfolk. There was a village here once, a small one, sitting behind the dunes on the flat northeast coast. Then the sand moved. Not in a storm, not in a single night, but slowly, decade after decade, the sea pushing the dunes back and burying what stood behind them. The houses went, the farmland went, and in the end, the whole parish of Eccles was gone under sand and water. All except one thing, the church tower. It stood alone, out on the open beach, long after everything around it had disappeared. For years, you could walk the wet sand at low tide, and there it was, a stub of medieval flint on the tide line, with the sea working at its base. Old photographs show exactly that. Just the tower, standing on the sand, with the water behind it. It held on longer than anyone expected. The church tower fell in 1895, and with it, the last standing piece of Eccles was gone. That is the record. There is no ghost story here to tell you. The photograph is the whole of it, and honestly, the photograph is enough. Number 5. Shipton, off Cromer, in Norfolk. This one you cannot see at all. Shipton was a parish in its own right, older than Cromer, with a church of St. Peter. The sea took it centuries ago. The land it stood on is now seabed, some way out from the modern seafront, under gray water that gives nothing away. But the ruins did not simply vanish. They say the old church of St. Peter still lies out there, broken down onto a reef beneath the waves. And that is not only a story. In 1888, a pleasure steamer working the Norfolk coast struck the submerged ruins off Cromer. It ran onto something hard and hidden below the surface, out where the old parish used to be. The rock they blamed picked up a name from it. That is the record. A real steamer, a real collision, on the drowned bones of a church. Now, number 6. And here I want you to slow down with me, because this is the one where the record beats the story cold. Kilnsea in Yorkshire sits at the very end of Holderness, and Holderness is the fastest eroding coastline in Europe. That is not a turn of phrase. This is soft clay cliff, and the sea has been taking it at around 2 meters a year, on average, for centuries. 2 meters, every year. Village after village along that coast has simply run out of land and fallen into the North Sea, and the county records list dozens of them by name. Whole parishes, written down, then gone. One of those names is Owthorne, and Owthorne is where the record turns grim. In the 1780s, the sea reached the churchyard. It did not just wear at the edge, it opened the ground. The cliff broke away beneath the graves, and coffins and bones spilled out onto the beach below, exposed on the sand at the foot of the crumbling clay. That was written down at the time. And here is the thing worth sitting with. The odd part is not the story. The odd part is that it was written down. There is no need for a legend at Owthorne. What people whisper about a place like this is always tamer than what the parish account already tells you, plainly in the record. Before the next one, stop for a second. What you just heard makes far more sense next to the estate plans and the dates. I put the places, the records, and the sources into a written document. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Grab it and come back. So, that is Kilnsea and the lost churches of Holderness. 6 stretches of coast, and the sea has taken the church, the street, and the graveyard at every one of them. Now the coast turns south, and it changes. Down in Sussex, there is a Saxon cathedral seat, the old church of the South Saxon bishops, believed to lie offshore, under the water. And in Kent, 2 great Norman towers still stand hard against a cliff, though the church they belonged to once sat a full mile inland. And then, last of all, the most substantial place of the 9, the drowned town whose streets you can still trace at low tide. That Saxon cathedral seat lies offshore at Selsey. Number 7, Selsey, in Sussex. Back in Saxon times, this was the seat of the South Saxon bishops, the first Christian center of the whole kingdom of the South Saxons. A cathedral church, a bishop, a settlement gathered around it. Here, I have to be honest with you. The record for this one is thin. Nobody can put a firm date on when the old seat went, or a survey drawing on the wall of a house that no longer exists. What is documented is the coastline itself. The land at Selsey has pulled back a long way since the bishops moved their seat inland to Chichester in the 11th century. Local tradition holds that the earliest church now rests under the water, out past the shingle. And that is where I leave Selsey. Not with a neat ending, because the paper trail does not give me one. Just gray water over a spit of stones and a strong belief held for centuries that something old lies beneath it. Number 8 is the opposite. This one you cannot lose because it refuses to go. Reculver in Kent. On the north coast, past the Thames estuary. Twin Norman towers side by side, dark against the sky. They belong to a church that once stood a full mile inland, with farmland and a village all around it. The Romans had a fort here before that. The church came later, and for centuries it sat comfortably back from the sea. Then the sea came for it. By the early 1800s, the cliff had eaten almost all the way to the walls. The parish gave up. Most of the church was pulled down. The graves were moved, and by every ordinary measure, that should have been the end of Reculver too. But the 2 towers still stand, right on the cliff edge now, where a mile of England used to be. And here is the odd part. They were not saved out of faith. Trinity House, the body that looks after lighthouses and sea marks, bought the towers and propped them up on purpose because sailors used them. 2 towers on a headland, visible for miles, told a ship exactly where it was on that stretch of coast. Saved not because anyone loved the church, but because ships needed something to steer by. So they stand today, a ruin kept alive to guide the very sea that destroyed it. Which brings us back to where we started. Number 9, the last and the largest of all of them, Dunwich. We met it at the top as the drowned town, the medieval capital of the East. The church bells people still say they hear ringing under the waves, but I held something back. Because the real weight of Dunwich is not out in the deep water. It is right at your feet, at the edge, twice a day. At low tide, the sea pulls back off the flat seabed, and you can trace them. The medieval streets of Dunwich, the lines where the roads ran, the shape of a town that once held thousands of people, and 8 or 9 churches, and a harbor that traded across the North Sea. It is all still down there, flattened, and the falling tide gives it back for a few hours before covering it again. The graveyards went the same way the towns did. The sea worked along the cliff, year after year, and opened the churchyards one by one and emptied them. What was buried on land in the Middle Ages is now spread across the seabed. That is the record. Registers, maps, and surveys, all the way back. So step back and look at the whole 9. A drowned capital in Suffolk. A trading port on the Humber gone in a single storm night. A Devon village broken by January weather. Church towers left standing on the tide line in Norfolk. A parish under a reef off Cromer. A churchyard opened by the sea in Holderness. A Saxon seat off Sussex. Twin towers clinging to a Kent cliff. And Dunwich, most of it now under grey water. Here is the one thing the list shows plainly. None of these reputations were invented. The sea genuinely took the parish, church, street, and graveyard together, and it is written down. The registers name the dead. The maps show the streets. The stories of bells under the water and roads you can walk at low tide, they did not come from nowhere. They grew out of real loss, recorded in real ink on this coast. Of all 9, which stretch of coast would you least want to stand near at high tide? Tell me in the comments. Grey water, where a town stood, that is where we end. The next one is already waiting on your screen.